All right, so we're live, and I've got Stephen Nekhaila here, chair of the Libertarian Party of Florida and at-large representative for the Libertarian Party, but more importantly, an absolutely brand new dad. How many months?
Almost a year. It'll actually be a
Oh,
year
oh
on Friday.
goodness.
So we
Time
have rounded the
flies,
sun. It's crazy.
right?
um, you hear all these things people tell you, like, time flies, so appreciate every moment, this and that. But until you really experience it, you look back. I look back like 5 months, 6 months, and I'm like, whoa, I remember when she was this little, or when she learned this thing, and it's crazy at what a difference it makes when they're so small. Every day they grow. So,
Right.
um,
It's it, you know, the interesting thing, because I'm 4 years in, so I really don't know anything.
you
And
have
what I
four
keep
times the experience than I do.
Well, I don't know for it sounds like a lot, but it's not. And a lot of parents will tell me, people that have children that have grown up and moved on and gone on to college, what they'll say is, you know, once your kids are all grown, you're ready for to be a parent. Like
Yeah,
that's when
I
you've
believe
kind of
it.
got it worked out. And I'm like, oh, joy, because I'm still just trying to figure things out. And I don't know how you are, but I absolutely it was rough on me
Yeah,
the first couple of months. So let's hear your story
sure.
when, the first couple of months, maybe the first, like, let's just say the first 3 months. What was that like?
Well, uh, the first 3 months. I mean, let's see here. When my wife was pregnant, you always hear everybody kind of gives you the same advice, and a lot of it's not really the best to prepare you. Like, good luck getting sleep and get ready to spend a lot
Right,
of money on
right,
diapers. And I didn't
right,
really appreciate that advice the most because I felt like it sort of set you up on a negative connotation going in.
right,
But it is absolutely true that for at least the first few months, you're not going to get sleep.
right,
So off the bat, that was pretty tough. But during the daytime, when they're so small like that, you can kind of put them down and they fall asleep. And every couple hours, they wake back up. They kind of look around. You feed them a bottle and just kind of hang out with them. They go back to sleep. Although that
right.
continues into the nighttime, so that was kind of tough. But I mean, just the love and the connection, and I think especially as a father, you know, later on your connection grows. Just the more time you have to spend with the baby, because the woman's had this human being in her womb for 9 months, so there's
Right.
a connection already off the bat. I
Right.
think for a father perspective, it does not to say there isn't a beautiful spark as soon as you see your child in the delivery room. I couldn't take my eyes off my daughter for 45 minutes, literally, as I took her upstairs and held her. It was a day I'll never forget. But every day you're like, how can I love this person even more? And somehow you do. So there's definitely looking back, I would say the first 3 months were definitely really tough. Um, and also really tough on the relationship too, because when you're two adults who have a bunch of responsibilities now taking care of another human life to make sure this little person stays alive, it's very stressful. And trying not to kill each other while also trying to get sleep and trying to get food and everything else and taking care of yourself and staying in shape, it's a juggling act. So I've always been pretty good at handling stress. I kind of just ease into it. So it was a tough time, but I would say the first 3 months are the biggest adjustment period. You just feel like you've got the carpet just flung from underneath you. But I can say at a year, I'm pretty much used to it. I don't
Okay.
feel like I'm in a position now where I feel overwhelmed. I think I adapted. So
Gotcha. So you have it
definitely.
all worked out.
Well, for the most part, no, just kidding. I feel more routine, I guess, about
Okay.
things. I kind of got used to waking up at nighttime, and okay, a couple times at night, it's you're gonna wake up, and that's probably the hardest part for me personally is just trying to get as much sleep in.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things I discovered with this whole parenthood thing is that, yeah, you don't have as much time for yourself, because really before having a kid, I had so much time, even with the Libertarian Party and, operating, 3 Wendy's, a Dairy Queen, and a full service restaurant. Plus we have 4 going on 5 stores in North Carolina. Going to the gym, trying to take care of myself, doing all these things, volunteering for different organizations. There was still this sense of, I have time to waste, where now every waking moment that our baby's, awake, typically goes towards the baby or working or whatever.
Right.
So really learning how to budget time and learning how to, prioritize things has been a really interesting tool that you need to have in your toolbox if you're going to try to be an adult and still do all the things you want to do, including keeping up relationships and doing all the other things we do extracurricularly. So yeah, it's been a really fascinating experience so far. I'm sure I'll learn more and more every single week for the next 18 years.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like just as I think I've got my son figured out, he's found something new, right? Right now he's getting ready to turn 4. So he will be 4 on February 8th. So like literally in a week.
Crazy.
And one of the new things that he does is it almost, I mean, he's 3, 4, right? So, I mean, I'm using language to describe him that I would normally use for an adult. And so it comes across as he's being spiteful, but he's not really. I mean, he's a little kid. He's figuring out the world, right? Like, so I mean, but for lack of a better way of explaining it, he will like get mad at us and then he'll be like, well, I want to break this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why, if you break it, then I'll have to throw it away and then you won't have it. Exactly. I'll break this too. Like he didn't seem to care, right? Like it's like, okay, whatever. My intention is to break it. But he doesn't, he doesn't like really put a huge effort into breaking it. It's not like he takes something and just bangs and bangs and bangs and bangs, right?
It's more to show, hey, I have this emotion. I'm going to show you I have this emotion.
Now he'll do stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, he does stuff. So he'll like throw something occasionally or what have you, but it's not like it's not generally to the point where actually something does get broke. I mean, maybe occasionally, depending on the toy, like some of the cheaper toys that aren't as more durable, more of a problem. Yeah. But so he does that, and that was kind of new, right? And that was like within the last couple of months, maybe not that long. And but before that, it was like he would have these like total fits, like just break down, just go berserk, like Godzilla, like literally just trashing the house. And I'm just like, what in the world, and those are the more crazy ones. Then there's other ones that aren't really as dramatic, right? Like his sleep pattern changes and, maybe his food preference changes and stuff like that. And you're like, well, you liked it yesterday and now you don't like it.
Yeah. Well, with my daughter too, every day it's kind of like we're trying to find new things to show her to keep her occupied, because, in the beginning, babies, like there's different stages to where they kind of become a little person.
Right.
And they just want to do everything. So, first, I call it the bucket, but it's one of those little things where they spin around and they have the little area to put their feet and they can kind of bounce up and down on it. So like she'll spin around on that. She'll play with those toys. She loved that for months. Now we got this big playpen that I've fallen asleep in it more times than once, especially when she wakes up at 6 a.m. and we go over there. All right, you play, and I'm gonna sit over here and fall asleep. Right. But she gets bored, and now that she's starting to stand, she wants the attention. She wants to be held. She wants to be brought outside. So it's a bit of a hot potato between me and my wife. Bringing her back and forth. And I remember my wife put her down, and she had to use the bathroom, and it's like right there. So I just put her down, and my daughter, she was like, don't pick me up, like she wanted to get picked up. And so my wife did what she had to do. She came back, picked up the baby, and she was kind of like, my wife had this necklace on, so she was like, pulling her necklace, like, why didn't you pick me up right away?
Right.
So it's so funny, kind of just seeing these little personality traits come out, even being a little rebellious, which as a libertarian and as a father is kind of interesting to me, because I'm like,
right.
It's like, well, I want my daughter to be a little rebellious, maybe even a lot of rebellious, but
Right.
for the right reasons, of course. And I'm sure as a
Right.
kid, she'll explore all her boundaries and limits and our limits. But I think raising a kid, and especially in the world we have today, at least knowing how I grew up, and I was always somebody who questioned authority and different things. And I think that comes naturally as libertarians, and I kind of wonder to what extent it's rebelliousness comes genetically versus how you're raised. But I do think there's certainly a healthy, there's authority that you want to subject yourself to that's worthy of being subjected to. A coach, a parent,
Hmm.
certain figures in life are there to teach you. But also at the same time, you still want to question everything, and you
Right.
still want to have a little bit of that rebellious streak. So it'll be interesting watching her grow up. I have no idea what she's going to be like in 10 years, but
Right.
it'll certainly a part of the fun to see how she grows and what she turns into.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I didn't realize that I would actually enjoy it is watching him come to like a new place in his, in his life, I guess. And so like, here's a memorable thing that came out of nowhere. We were driving somewhere and we saw these big like earth movers, right? And all of a sudden he was like, "Daddy, that's an excavator." This was like 6 months ago, right? Like he's getting
Yeah,
ready to turn 4, but like 3.5 years old. He's all like, "Daddy, there's an excavator." And I'm like, "Yes, yeah, that is an excavator." And that is like, I know what the word means clearly, but I don't recall using that word to you.
hmm.
Um, so clearly you've learned that somewhere, and your exposure to the world is kind of limited at this point, right?
Right.
Like he doesn't, so he probably was on TV or something. But the fact that he saw it and then recognized it and then said it, and then excavator is not a word that I would expect a 3.5-year-old to use, like, digger or something else like that, something a little bit more simple.
Right.
But he just
So,
threw me off my guard. And I was like, wow. And there's been other instances where he'll say something and I'm like, and it's just like, it feels like it comes out of nowhere. One moment you're talking to them and, they seem to be at like this level.
right.
And then all of a sudden they say something and let me get my hand in the picture. They say something and then all of a sudden it feels like they just leaped. And you're
Yeah.
like, how did you like
Right.
where was the progression in
Yeah.
between here? Like I just it felt like you went from here to here out of nowhere on me.
Yeah.
And it's stunning.
That's so interesting, and I've seen it in my daughter as well, where she, even a little baby, you can tell like one day, she'll be grabbing at the rings, trying to get up in the playpen to pull herself up to be able to stand, and then the next day I turn around and she's standing on her own, and I'm like, how did you get up there? And she's just looking at me, and I'm like, how did you just on your own? I've never seen her do it. I don't even know what she looks like getting up, but I turn around and she's up.
Right.
And there's been a lot of stuff like that. It's just like, the crazy thing about kids, which is really inspiring, and I think in a big way, kids kind of help us relive a lost part of our childhood that we've forgotten about. Because when
Right.
we view the world through their eyes and watch how they progress, it kind of reminds you of like, oh wow, that I was like that at one point. There
Right.
was a point where I discovered whatever. My first time I saw the beach, and I was like, whoa, what is this? Or whatever it is.
Right.
Um, but they're so thirsty for knowledge, and every day
Oh
everything's so
yeah.
exciting, and it's just crazy at the level they progress.
Oh yeah. We're looking into schools right now, like pre-K and then, kindergarten. Well, I think it'll be pre-K for a while because kindergarten's like 5 years old, roughly. Um, and so we're going in there and some of their curriculum, they're like, well, they're going to learn how to do this. And in some cases, I'm like, well, he already knows he's known how to do that. And I don't praise us as like these great and wonderful parents who have just
Right.
done this amazing job. Like we deliberately sat down and said, we're going to make sure he's super duper smart. All that we really did is just simply say, oh, if he's interested in it and we feel like we can help him participate safely, then we will.
Mhm.
Right. So like I was working on a mailbox probably like a week ago. I was doing some touch ups on a mailbox that I built, and he wanted to help screw something in. So the pilot holes were drilled, and I put the screw in just a little bit with by hand, and I gave him the drill. I was like, all right, drilled in. So he like lines it up, and he's like drilling it, right?
That's awesome.
And and so he's just learning a lot of these things because we simply just let him and we help him
Right.
participate. It has its drawbacks. Everything tends to take longer. But, um, but I feel like if he's interested, why would I withhold it from him
Well, and I wonder how
if I
many
don't have to?
modern men there are that probably never held a drill, let alone
Right,
you put together something that was actually useful. To
right,
nowadays, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are real men, real manly men that never changed the oil, and I'm not
right.
saying there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but at least to do these things with your dad, to know that you can do something, I
Yes.
think is really cool, and I think you know, I mean, I didn't change my own oil until, I had to change it on my truck, and I looked it up on YouTube, and I said, oh, this would be cool. I'll try it on my own. And I learned, and I think, looking back at it, all the things that, my own dad showed me how to do, or, things that we did together, or things that I knew I had confidence to do later on. So I was like, oh, I did that before. I've ever seen my dad do that, or,
Right.
whatever. So I think, I think it's, parenting is so important, and it's obvious to many of us, but it's not necessarily I wouldn't say it's not the norm, but
Hmm.
it's slowly, it's a slim majority, I guess I should say. Especially dads and fathers. I was reading some statistics recently that came up, and it's something like 90% of the men in prison are fatherless. And
Right. Yeah.
there's all these statistics that show having a father around is so important.
Yes.
And it almost seems like in today's society, you don't, really motherhood, and always, I mean, for sure, motherhood has always been like the big thing. To be a woman, to be a mother, it's a part of their nature. It's a part of the feminine, just the divine feminine to nurture and give life. But fatherhood, there's something to it for
Hmm.
both daughters and sons,
Yes.
that shows up in the science and the statistics, that it's so important. And I think all these things go back to just even showing your kid how to use a power drill. Like, how cool is
Right.
that? That let me use the power drill,
Right.
and I'm sure there's a reason for it, and the confidence and the ability, and hey, there's the encouragement and the safety and everything else. So fatherhood, definitely, especially after becoming a father, has been something on my mind. Is just
Hmm.
to be there, to be present, to be a dad. It's statistically one of the most important things you could do as a man. When
Right.
you're called to this role, it's really interesting.
You know, this is not a popular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. Um, I think that, and this is why I'm doing the show, bringing
Mhm.
dads on, because I think dads' voices are important. And it's not even that I necessarily have to always agree with them. I've had, a couple of dads on where maybe I agreed with them mostly or somewhat, but not entirely. And hopefully I'll have some dads on in the future where maybe I disagree entirely. I don't know. And it's not about arguing with them either. But I
Right.
think, to what you were saying, I think that dads are absolutely critical to the family unit, maybe even more so than moms. And
Mm.
and 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 I mean that not in the sense of you can have a dad and everything will work out, but you could have a mom and not everything will work out. That's not what I'm
Right.
saying.
Right.
What I'm saying is the detriment that's caused by not having a dad, I think, is actually worse than the detriment caused by not having a mom. And part of that, part of that view may stem from the fact that one, a mom births the child,
Hmm.
so there is this connection that is much harder
Right.
to uh to have a detriment, with, right? Like
Yeah.
I think I think dads kind of have to maybe work on a I'm trying to think of how to say it. I think dads have to put more effort necessarily, But I think also if they don't, the detriment of that is worse. So maybe that's how I want to say it. And I'll tell you a story that I remember reading out of a book a while back. And I don't remember the name of the book. I think it was Wild at Heart. It was back when I was going to church and we were doing like a men's group and they had us reading a book. And the guy was a psychologist. He was a Christian psychologist. So everything came from a more Christian perspective. But he was telling this story, and I don't remember if it was true or just one that he made up to illustrate. But it's one that virtually everybody could probably say, yep, I kind of get it. A mom was making a dress for her little daughter. And in the story, the mom makes this really beautiful dress. The girl tries it on. Mom's like, oh man, you're so beautiful. And the girl's like, yes, I am so beautiful. Then they both stop and they look at each other. And the mother says, let's go ask daddy. And then the girl's eyes light up and she runs to go ask
Mhm.
daddy. So it was like daddy was the final
Yes.
person to say, to like he was the one that gave that, just that last bit
Mm,
of confirmation. Right.
yeah.
It's not the mom. It's not that the moms didn't count. Don't get me
Right.
wrong. So if
Right.
any moms are watching, I am not suggesting
I,
that moms are irrelevant. I'm just
I think,
suggesting that I think there's a special place, and
yeah.
it turns out
I,
very negatively when they're not
I,
there.
I think there's something really special about a dad's love compared to a mother's love,
Yes.
because a mother's love is almost, um, it's always going to be there. Where a father's love, it's there, but I think being rooted as sort of, you know, in our masculinity and how men operate tends to mean more.
Right.
If a man gives a compliment to another man, it's going to hold a lot of weight, especially if it's a man somebody respects. If it's your
Right.
father, it's going to mean more in the sense that they're telling the truth. Where a
Right.
mommy's love is more of a comforting love, you know, it's a little bit different. Have you ever, it's kind of interesting, because in a lot of other societies, or at least in ancient primitive societies, there's when a man or a young boy becomes a man,
I
there's
know
usually
where this is going.
okay. I
Go. Keep
wonder. I
going.
wonder if
Keep
you know
going.
exactly where I'm gonna go with this. When a boy becomes a man, there's a coming of age ritual,
Rite of
um,
passage.
rite of passage, right? For a young girl, typically it's when they get their period, they become a woman. It's very physical. It's very obvious. But for a boy, it's not really obvious at what point do you become a man. What does it mean to be a man? Is it when you
Right.
get a car? Is it when you lose your virginity? What all these stereotypes. What does it really mean to become a man?
Right.
And so there was an ancient society, and what they would do is, and I feel like you've heard this before, they would go and
Does this have to do with ants?
no, no,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
but the ant one is that's definitely not how I would want to reach man with it if I had to get a bunch
All
of
right.
ants. But what these guys
I
would
think we're on
do
the same
is,
wavelength, though.
yeah, they would take the moms would know that this is going to happen, and
Yep.
all the men in the village would get together and they would storm into the village in the middle of the night, and they would take the boys from the huts, and the moms would pretend like, oh my god, and they'd be crying, begging, don't take away my kid, and they would take him into the woods, and essentially they would be out there for like 3 days, and they'd be scared to hell, and in the process of being out in nature for 3 days, no food, no water, when they return they would become men.
Right.
And I think symbolically what's going on here is there's a separation from the mother and a connection to the father.
Right.
And I think when you don't have that separation from the mother, that's where you have a lot of your mommy's boys.
Hmm.
And to be a part of the hierarchy of men means, to become a man, it means you'll be judged by men. It's
Yes.
more of a boy going to man. Obviously I have a daughter, so things are a little bit different. But certainly I think, even with a young woman, a girl is going to look at her father as a template for what she's going to
Right.
want in a man when she eventually finds a partner.
Right.
The kind of men she's going to be attracted to, the kind of men she's going to marry, how she expects to be treated, and most importantly, what kind of boundaries she has as a woman.
Right.
So, in both cases, in the statistics that I've seen, as a matter of fact, possibly a controversial statistic is that single parents who are men I believe it's their children, like have a lower rate of, they do better in school and they stay away from crime, whereas single mothers raising those kids usually fare worse. And I think a part of that too is women aren't necessarily designed to punish, or not saying they can't,
Right.
believe me, but there is something to, that's inherent in, a father figure.
Hmm.
It's really, really important for boys, but also super important for girls.
Absolutely.
It's definitely something that, I think is probably understated, and
Right.
in society. And I think you have like the deadbeat dads and everything else, and and some people say that in television and TV they usually portray the dad as like the dope or like the loser or whatever. And I have
Hmm.
this whole theory on how everything's kind of swapping, where women in TV are starting to become more traditionally masculine,
Hmm.
and traditionally masculine, or kind of this goofy, not really, I wouldn't even necessarily call it masculine, but I guess you can say the immature masculine or toxic
Right.
masculine, if you want to call it that, is kind of portrayed in like the average guy. So the average guy is really this toxic man, right? But women can be masculine and they won't need a man. But in reality, I think the thing that we need as a society the most right now is the men need to be, positively masculine men, really ingrained in their
Right.
masculinity and what that means. And we can go into that if you'd like. But the women also should, have that that femininity, and we, there's a polarity there. And polarity is what, good relationships are built on. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
No, it's funny. So going back a little bit,
Yeah.
the story that I thought you were going to tell me, there's a tribe, an old tribe, is probably not very many of them, out in
Mhm.
like the Amazon. And when it's time for a boy to become a man, the men or whoever, I don't know exactly who does it, but they go out and they catch bullet ants. Okay.
Mhm.
So
I've seen
named
that.
after the fact that
It
their
looks
sting
terrible.
feels like a being shot with a bullet. And they make some concoction, they catch them and they knock them out so that the bullet ants are knocked out. Then they make these gloves, and then they stick the heads of the bullet ant into these gloves so that the ant can't get out. And so then what happens is the boy has to wear the gloves for like 10 minutes. And I think they do it repeated times. So this is their mark of becoming a man. Like, you do this, you are a man. Now, the interesting thing is, I think a lot of people misunderstand. They're like, why would I need
Mhm.
to do some crazy thing like that to be a man? I don't think it's actually the particular event per se.
Right.
And I'll tell you why in a moment. I think what it is that it's it's the defined moment,
Yes.
not only for the boy, but for the men in the tribe.
Right.
Because what happens is the boy is told, you do this, you are a man. But more importantly, they treat you like a man. They expect
Mm.
you to
Yes.
act like a man. And so here's what I think it might look like in our society, which is not so dramatic, if you will. Um, when I was 18, I would come to my mom and dad and I'd be like, "Oh, mom, dad, what do you think about this? What do you think I should do? What do you think I do?" And I would just constantly ask them questions. And my dad finally one day was like, "Son, you are a man now. It's time to make a decision and learn
Mm.
to live with it." And that just kind of really stunned me. And it was just like, oh, you know,
Mm.
and it wasn't that he just told me what to do. It was like the way that he said it, the manner in which it came across. It was like, I expect you to be a man, and I'm gonna treat you like one.
Yes.
Right now, he might treat me like a young man, if you will, because I mean,
Right.
obviously he's my dad, and whatever. But for the most part, like, this was like that clear, you have crossed over, son. It is time to be different than what you once were. And when I mentored a kid, I did a similar thing. I was mentoring him between like 16, I think it was about maybe 15 and a half, to like when he was 18. And I was tough on him,
Mhm.
and I mean, I was so tough that when I went over on Easter Sunday, I was giving him hell because he had not done some work out of his GED book that he had promised
Mm.
he would do. And so I was giving him a lot of hell, like I was running him through the ringer over. I mean, I wasn't like cussing or anything. I was just, and I
Right.
was like, dude, why did you not do this? He's like, well, it was too easy. And I was like, what are you talking about? If it was so easy, then why don't you just do it? So I was
Exactly.
tough on him, right? he got so mad. He was like, I think you need to leave. I'm going to spend the rest of the day with my family. And I was like, as I was going home, I was like, did I just mess this up? Like, was I so tough on him that he's now not going to want to see me anymore? Like, oh my, and I was kind of nervous a little bit about it,
Yeah.
but it turned out that wasn't the case. And then he turned 18.
Did
And
he
once
appreciate that?
he did,
Okay.
he did. So he turned 18. And here's the fun part. I started treating him like he was a man. I didn't give him nearly as much question about his decisions. I think one time he was going to go to one of the Black Lives Matter rallies, and somebody who's in the liberty community here in Florida had posted like this list of like, if you're an activist, you're going to you're going to a protest, here are some list of things that, a checklist of things that you should do. And so I just kind of sent that to him, and I was like, all right, man, if you're going to go, here's a good list of things that you should do. And he came back later and he messaged me and he's like, dude, he's like, I appreciate that. He's like, a lot of, some of my old mentors would have called me racist for going. And I was like, you got to do what you want to do. Just do it safely. Right. Like, let's make sure you come home at the end of the day. Right. And then he was out of town. He had moved to a different state, but then he come back and to visit, and he was like, called me up and he's like, dude, I want to meet with you. Let's go hang out for lunch or whatever. And so we went out to lunch, and we were eating lunch, and he said, he's like, I'm going to get the bill. He goes, because you used to pay for me, but I'm a man now, so I pay for you.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I was like, who let all this dust up in here, yo? Like somebody throw some sand up in this place. But it was just nice to know that I didn't screw it up. Right. And I think that's the thing that children need is that confirmation that says you are a man or a woman. Right. And I think a man, I guess the way to say it is a man is the ultimate say. Like he's like there's nobody after him to confirm it. If a man doesn't confirm it, there's nobody else to confirm it. Mom can only take him so far. I'm sorry, moms, but that's what I think.
Yeah, something you said. I mean, it kind of gave me chills for a second because this idea of, hey, I'm gonna be hard on you now because once you're a man, that's it. You're on your own. Like nobody's gonna be hard on you. Nobody's gonna tell you what to do, give you direction. So, although you might think I'm a pain in the ass now, appreciate it because there's people on the street that kind of wish they had a life coach or somebody to tell them what to do, because their decisions led to where they are. So you got to learn the things you need now. So when you're on your own, you can be self-sufficient. And I think that is kind of a part of being a man, and especially part of our American culture is that idea of, hey, look, I'm responsible for the decisions I make. And I make my decisions as an individual, whether that's going to be good for me or bad for me. Right. But to prepare a human being to be in a position to make good decisions, I mean, that's a big role. It's
and that is what you were talking about earlier. You said that's proper masculinity, like because you said like, hey, we could get into it. I think this. For one, I do not agree with this notion that there's a such thing as toxic masculinity. I think there is toxic behavior that some men engage in, but I think there is either masculinity or it is something else, in my opinion. I'm more of a, maybe you get out of line a little bit. Maybe you yell when you're not supposed to, or, if you believe in spanking, maybe you give them a swat on the butt when maybe they didn't really need it or whatever. So I think there's a bit of a range under which a man can, fall within and still be masculine, just like, hey, you got a little bit out of hand there. But I think there are some other behaviors where I'm like, that's not masculinity at all. I'm sorry. Like sleeping with a bunch of women, like when I was 20, that sounded like a great idea, but that wasn't real masculinity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, something like, let's say hedonism, right? Just going out and having a lot of empty sex with a bunch of women. And I think it could be different if you're like, I forget the guy's name, but if you're somebody who really loves a woman and can appreciate a woman in more of a romantic type, and it's a little bit different than just chasing feels. and chasing pleasure, bodily pleasure, that's more of something a woman does. That's more of a feminist or feminine trait, right? A man is expected to be, the kind of person who is out in the trench, on the most extreme scale of it, out in the trenches, not complaining. If you're out there with the boys and your life depends on it, you need to be the kind of guy that can then step up to the plate when literally it's life or death, right? That's like the extreme of it, right? That's like the most, I guess, the Hollywood
Band of Brothers,
right? And it's I've always masculinity and femininity, right? It's like, okay, there's so many, everybody has their own definition of kind of what that means. And there's the David Data definition where it's like, well, men are like mountains, women are like the ocean, constantly changing, sometimes violent, sometimes calm. And, men are like the mountaintops. You've got Jack Donovan definition of masculinity, where masculinity is all about, honor, respect, courage, friendships, bonds, and, all those different types of things. And then you have like a scientist version of masculinity, which is very much so, men are more mechanical. We play with toys and things. We're more interested in objects than we are with people, where women tend to be more, interested in social, types of things. And they're more in with community, where men are tend to be more individualistic and kind of, we a little bit different. I would say my personal definition of masculinity, it's kind of all those things, but I think, there's different flavors of the masculine for sure. There's your Andrew Tates, right, on one end, and there's your,
I don't know if I'd call him.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call him necessarily. I don't know. He's an interesting
I don't like
character.
Him. I'm not a big fan.
He's a caricature, right? He's a caricature of. But maybe a better example, would be like a soldier on the front in Ukraine, right? Who's out with the boys and, eating shit sandwiches every day, but still able to give off a good attitude, right? So, what are some of the characteristics in somebody like that? Somebody who is able to keep a level head when there's adversity, who's able to have courage to do things that, is going to keep you and your boys alive. So there's some sort of bond, et cetera. But as someone who's also, wise and able to, impart knowledge on the next generation and, be somebody who can be a good leader. I think leadership is a very masculine role as well. So, I think there's all types of bits and pieces that go to what's masculine, including strength, right? Let's say muscle, strength, those types of things are stereotypically masculine for a reason.
Right.
Women tend to be, they're the weaker sex. No one ever says, oh, you're not strong enough physically, so you're a bad woman. But, as kids, if you're the strongest guy, if you're able to pick up the biggest rock or whatever, you're playing football, these are things that men are measured by. Right. So, it's all a matter of, I think you can boil masculinity down to something as simple as the hierarchy. As men, we put each other into sort of a hierarchy, or, we're able to judge each other. And I think that's the best way to understand what masculinity means, is to be around a good group of guys and to be judged by your peers, because you can't be a man I don't think you can define masculinity in a vacuum necessarily, or per se, you can't judge your own masculinity in a vacuum. Maybe in certain circumstances, but among other men is where men are meant to be judged, is, I guess, what I'm saying. Yeah.
And I want to add to that, and I think you'll agree. But if not, well, you're on your own. I think that all this stuff that we're talking about is on a spectrum, right? Like there isn't like you are either this or you're not masculine, and women can't, because I think that's. I think what you're speaking to, in my opinion, would be like more like this is what is typical, but it's not always. Like I've known some men who are very straightforward. They're what we call the straight shooters, right? They will tell you what, they're not afraid to hurt your feelings. Not necessarily to be mean, but just to be honest, right? Like
Right.
they're being honest, and if they hurt your feelings in the process, that's part of what it comes with their personality. But then I've also met men who I think are very masculine, but they're more like soft spoken
Mhm.
and they're more relaxed. They're quiet. So and then I've met women who I think have the more typical feminine traits, and I think there are women that have the more masculine traits. My mother was one of them. Like my mom is where I learned how to use like every tool ever and how to do all the home repairs and all that. That wasn't my dad's forte, but I still believe that my dad was a very masculine man, even though he didn't necessarily always partake in some of the things that are typically associated. And I think that's where people make
Right.
this mistake, is that we want to talk about things. And I think it's worthwhile to say, these are the things that are typical of
Right.
men. And like you were saying,
Well,
men
I
judge
think
other men in those ways,
right.
whether they like it or not.
And what's interesting about the whole masculine feminine thing is you can even look in gay relationships and you can tell which one is the masculine and which one is the feminine.
Right.
It's very obvious. Some of the most masculine men I've met are gay, right? And there's also in feminine relationships too. There's a masculine and feminine polarity in those relationships.
Right.
I think if you're biologically male, you're more predisposed to be more masculine, and I think if you're really like even the most masculine woman, I don't think is as masculine as the most masculine male. I don't think it's possible,
Right.
Biologically. Maybe if you're taking hormones, I don't know, but that's the whole thing. I think there is this beautiful dance between the two sexes, and there is a dichotomy, just like there's magnetism. If you have a positive and you have a negative, and they connect, or if you have two poles, they stay away like this. In some relationships I've seen, you have a very feminine male with a very masculine woman, or vice versa, and sometimes, maybe the masculine male is super masculine and the feminine woman is super feminine, and there's like a really crazy, like chaotic, like firework relationship, or maybe they're both kind of, maybe one's more here, one's more there, blah, 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 blah. But, we see these things, and also there's different types of people. And at the end of the day, that's a big part of it too.
Right.
But I think society, for whatever reason, we've become very obsessed with gender and sexuality, which really has been a long time coming over the last 200 years, I think. And there's a lot of history to it with the sexual revolution, everything else. It's kind of strange how it ended up here, because the conversation was very different even 100 years ago, but it seems to have trailed into where we are now. So there is this obsession with sex, gender, how many genders are there? What do these things mean? Or, you go on TikTok and you go on YouTube and there's endless compilations of, kids making up genders. They don't really understand. They feel a certain way and they're trying to put a label on it. And I think that's one of the problems too. I think there's a lot of men out there that are probably truly masculine, but maybe they don't fit the stereotypical label. And so they think, well, maybe I'm more feminine, or, or maybe, I don't like masculinity because I don't like the idea of what it is.
Right.
And I think, that's certainly an issue as far as, that it aids in the confusion. And I don't really know, as we've said, in this conversation, there's a variety of traits and attributes, but there's no like, you can definitely point to someone and be like, this person's masculine, this person's feminine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't somebody else who also fits a totally different description, but is also, masculine, or feminine, etc. So there's a lot of confusion for whatever reason. People just don't know their identity, I guess, whether sexually or just energetically. And
I think it's a matter. I think it's a matter of we have allowed the extremes to define things.
Yes.
Right. The extreme masculine men, if you will, have defined it. Now, I don't know where you sit. I'm not a big fan of, like, say, the Andrew Tates of the world.
Right.
And I've been very vocal about that. And that's because I've watched some of his own words. And I'm like, dude, you're manipulating people. Like, I just I don't see that as, as a net positive, especially when there are men out there that are looking for a male figure to look up to, and then you're
Yeah.
teaching them to exploit people. I can't get behind that, right? And so I look at it and I say, I think that a man would be one version of a masculine man would be the kind of guy who, when his kid falls down and honestly gets hurt, picks up his kid, hugs him. It's okay, buddy. You don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah. But then in other cases, when he knows the kid is not, maybe being exaggerative or whatever, like knock it off and get up and stop crying.
Yeah.
Right. Like the man knows, and moms probably do this too, but we're talking about men. So
Hmm.
men, I think a proper masculine man learns to know when the right
Mm.
response, is necessary. There is a time to say, hey, dust yourself off and get up and keep going. And there's another time to say, come here, let me give you a hug.
I think you'll find this really fascinating. Have you ever read the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover?
Mm-mm.
It's a really interesting book, and it's by these two guys, and they talk about the idea of masculine archetypes. So you have the magician, which is the archetype of, this sort of mechanical or technological aptitude, tinkering and figuring things out. Men are very mechanical, men figure things out, blah, blah, blah. So that's like the magician. And there's a dark side, there's a shadow side, a Freudian side to each of these archetypes.
Okay.
So the opposite of the magician might be like, I don't know, like someone who uses that power for evil, right? There's
Right.
the lover, right? Especially when you're young, we tend to develop our lover archetypes, when we're in high school. The opposite of that there might be several different shadows. Could be the attached lover, where you just want to hump everything, right? Or,
Right.
it could be the kid who's too attached to his mother and not able to let go. So there's different shadows. There's the warrior archetype, which is, the going out into the world and doing battle and conquering, building businesses, literally going to war, doing whatever it takes to survive and thrive in life would be the warrior. The opposite of that could be, sort of a destructive version of the warrior.
Right.
And then you have the king, and the king archetype is the crown. It's essentially a fusion. Once you've achieved all of the archetypes, you're a well-rounded man. And the
Mhm.
king, you go to Bible studies, you know about, of course, King Solomon, who I think is probably one of the most, for Christians, the most iconic version of the
Mhm.
king. King
Right.
Solomon was a wise man. He led his kingdom good. He gave good advice. He was in touch
Mhm.
with God and everything else. And, he's the wise King Solomon. So, what does a king do? A king teaches, a king shows, a king
Right.
is fair, but firm. And I think that's the important key, is that, to embrace our king archetypes as men. It's
Right.
not to be mean and to be, harsh and to be evil and to inflict harm, but it is at times, maybe we have to discipline or give a hard lesson, and the only way that lesson's absorbed is through sort of a tough love. But it's
Right.
through love, right? It's
Right.
really like when you told that your the kid you were looking after to, hey, why do you do your GED? What's going on here? He got really upset. That's that king energy, is to say, hey, look,
Right.
You have to, you're holding him accountable. And as men, we need to hold our kids accountable, our families accountable, ourselves accountable, and
Right.
other men accountable. And one reason possibly that masculinity is so demonized, is confused, is that men are more isolated now than they've ever been. So really, if you don't have these tribes of men, your boys, your friends, your whatever, and you go out there and hang out and do masculine things together, whether it's hanging out or going fishing or shooting guns, or
Right.
obviously there's guys out there that are special forces guys that when they get back from deployment and they're back in the civilian world, they miss going out
Right.
and doing these crazy things out wherever else,
Right.
because they're with their boys, they're doing all this masculine stuff, whatever. But where you are, I think our self-confidence as men comes from our interactions with other men,
Right.
As a large part of what it means to be, a man and blah 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 blah. But going back, to the whole being a father, how does all this go back into being a good parent?
Right.
Is being that for our kids, and being a good man, being a good father. I would imagine means that we help our children develop into these archetypes as well, and we use these things to teach and help them grow. And we have to be the best version of ourselves as we can as parents in order to grow our kids into the best version of themselves too.
Right. No, I agree. And I think that, I think it's every man's challenge. Well,
Right.
every man that has a child in this, in this conversation's sake, it's their challenge to try to figure out, okay, who am I and how do I use that to edify my child?
Mhm.
Right. And maybe you're the very impatient type, the one that speaks quickly, fast, you're opinionated. I'm probably talking about me, but maybe that's the kind of person you are. Well, then you have to figure out, okay, how do I balance that such that my child is edified from the interaction they get with me? But maybe somebody is the more soft-spoken kind of guy, right? Like they're not necessarily the guy that's going to run first into a fight to break it up, right? And that doesn't, and I don't think that doing so or not. I mean, I think that more men should, but I don't think that's necessarily a requirement in itself by
Right.
itself for all men, right? Um, and but like, let's say that you've got this man who might be characterized as more effeminate. He speaks more softly. He's more quiet. He doesn't get angry and vociferous about things necessarily. Maybe he doesn't even work on the house, right? He just, he's an engineer and he pays somebody else to do it. And he just, draws pictures in CAD all day. Sorry, engineers, this is a joke. Don't take me to the tap. But what I'm getting at is maybe he's not
Right.
like the brute man that we think of as masculine, right? Is really what I'm getting at. He has to
Well,
balance, he has to use that character. I mean, not that character, but that personality that he has to edify his kids in the same way that the guy who's a rough, tough, a roughneck out on the oil rig who might have a kid, right? They both have to figure out who am I as a man? How do I edify my child with the particular qualities that I have and the range of qualities in the way that I have them as a man? How do I edify my child? Right. And and maybe even the world around me, depending on, the role that you play. If you're a boss or you're, the chair of a party or what have you, right? Like, I think those are the things that men have to figure out. And I think they're kind of unique to men.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, men, I think we have unique responsibilities that are expected of us,
Mhm.
that aren't placed on women necessarily, that are unspoken, but they don't need to be, right? They're
Right.
things that we are expected to do. We're expected to be the protectors. So if somebody broke into the house right now, I'm expected to go grab a gun or use my fist or do whatever it takes to fight and potentially die in order to save my family. That's just an expectation.
Right.
I'm expected to go to work to make the money to keep, the house together, and pretty much responsible for, whatever happens as far as, our financial well-being, our shelter, or whatever it is. And if something were to happen, if a hurricane were to come through here, destroy the whole place, which is not an unlikely scenario where I live.
Right.
So that's something that can totally happen. What do we do if we lose everything and we're on the road? It's the man who is responsible for those things. And I gotta say, I don't know how single mother. That's got to be one of the hardest things, to be a single mom, because you're not only providing, but you're also trying to discipline kids. I don't know if you can do both. It's tough. It's got to be crazy tough.
Right.
I don't know if it can be done the proper way. I don't know. I mean, I think there is a lot of benefits to having a two-family household. There's a lot of benefits to having a father figure, to having good masculine role models, whether it's a father or a father plus other masculine role models. I grew up in the YouTube generation, so when I was growing up, around end of high school and in college, I don't know if you know these guys, but I would watch a lot of Elliot Hulse and the Hodge
Mm.
twins on YouTube. They're
No,
really
sorry.
they're all bodybuilder guys. You know, they
That's you
lift.
young people stuff,
Yeah,
okay?
I think Elliot might be your age. Actually, they all might be.
Oh,
But but I was looking. They're young. They're not that much older than me. Probably by 10 years. So they were like right at that age bracket where I felt like, oh, these guys are just like one step ahead. And I'm kind of assuming your age, DL, but I'm also pretty young. So
well, I'm 44, so
okay,
old man, basically.
yeah, a little bit of gray. I'm starting to, I went to CVS the other day, and you know how they have those little cameras that
Right.
that they're watching you when you check out on the self checkout. So it shows you
Yeah.
like a picture of your hairline, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, man,
Hey,
I'm doing.
so I'm just gonna throw this out there. I mean, there is
Yeah,
an option, okay? I'm just
that's.
saying.
I've been really considering going that route and just making the plunge and just seeing, what I look like if I just shave
Right.
my. A lot of guys do it nowadays, and I like the look, so it
I
might
think it
save me
works.
10 grand on a hair transplant.
Well, let's wind this down real quick.
Yeah.
We got one comment in here,
Okay.
and it's directed at you. So let's throw that
Cool.
up on the screen here. It's Stephen Kuhn. He says, "Hey DL, hope all is well." And actually, it is well. Things are, pretty good here. We're getting past winter, so that was obviously a
Yeah.
horrible thing for us here in northern Florida. It got like to 40 degrees, and I was like, "What in the world?" He says, "Get Steven up here to Jack's. I hear he knows how to operate Wendy's. We need some decent Wendy's up here." So I do not personally go to Wendy's, but apparently people that do have taken notice that, hey, you know what? It
Yes.
could be better. So maybe they need your leadership up here.
Well, you never know. There's always opportunities to grow, and we're always looking at new opportunities. So you never know. I might take up that offer and open up some Wendy's and Jacks. Where I'm actually working on opening up a new one in Almirada. So
Oh,
after
nice.
that, there's really nowhere to go in the Keys. So we might skip all the way up there to Jacksonville. You never know.
Sounds good. All right. So any final words for people out there?
Well, final words I would say are if you've got kids, appreciate it, love them, hug them tight, teach them, be the best man you can be, and as they say in the Bible, have your cup floweth over. So I take that
Mm-hmm.
take care of yourself so you can take care of others. Be a strong unit for your family, for your community, for your political party, especially if you're a libertarian, and for your state and for your country, because it's going to take strong men and women to go out there and change the world, and we're going to have to raise strong kids to finish the mission, because unfortunately it never ends, and it'll be
Right.
continuous forever. So strong families build strong children build strong communities, which build strong nations, which creates prosperity. So be the best version of yourself that you can be, and pass that down.
All right. Awesome. Well, you hold tight there. I'm going to close this out, and then I'll get back with you after the show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you're new to the show, this is actually a show I've been doing for a while. Reach out to any dads that you know and let them know, hey, there's a guy here that wants to talk to you. And it doesn't have to be about libertarian stuff. It can be about anything. I've had plenty of dads come on and talk about all kind of topics. I've had dads come on here and talk about their challenges with mental health issues. We had one dad that came on and he had bipolar. I had another dad that came on and he wanted to discuss about let me see if I can get this right. I believe it was his daughter who came to him and said, "Dad, I'm trans," right? These are the issues that dads face, and I'm not here to judge. I can do that elsewhere on Twitter or wherever else, but here is a platform to raise up dads. So if you know of a dad, reach out to him and say, "Hey, man, go find this guy, get on his show, talk about what's important to you." Otherwise, remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week and I'll catch you next time. And for now, we're out.